My name is Riley, and I am exactly 28 years old today. I spent 10 years proudly serving in the U.S. Navy, defending our beautiful country. I thought my sacrifice was building a secure future for my family. But when I returned from a grueling deployment at Naval Station Norfolk, I did not walk into a loving homecoming. Instead, I found my husband selling the house I paid for, draining our 10-year-old daughter college fund, and packing his bags to run off with a woman barely out of college. He threw a check at my combat boots and told me to get a motel. I was completely devastated until my brilliant daughter smirked, handed me a hidden flash drive, and proved that we were about to destroy his entire pathetic existence. Exactly 3 days later, he was calling me in a blind panic. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who underestimated your worth and tried to take everything you worked for. I stepped out of the vehicle in my full Navy uniform duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The crisp air of our quiet Connecticut suburb usually brought me peace, but today something felt terribly wrong. The lawn of the house I purchased using my VA loan was trampled. A moving truck idled in the driveway. Two men were hauling my custom dining table out the door. I dropped my bag, the heavy canvas hitting the concrete with a thud. Standing on the porch, sipping iced coffee as if it were a casual Sunday, was my husband Derek. He was 32 years old, dressed in a designer suit he could not afford on his failing cryptocurrency broker salary. Clinging to his arm was a blonde woman who looked barely 24, wearing oversized sunglasses and a smug expression. She was pointing at my antique mirror as movers loaded it. Derek looked down at me, unfazed by my arrival. There was no guilt in his eyes. He pulled a folded slip of paper from his jacket and tossed it down the porch steps. It fluttered before landing against my combat boots. I stared at the paper, then back up. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice carrying the sharp edge I usually reserved for commanding recruits. "Where are my things going? Where is Mia?" Derek took a slow sip of his coffee. "The paper at your feet is a check for $500, he said smoothly. "Take it and go find a cheap motel. I sold this house yesterday." I stood frozen, my mind racing to comprehend his words. "You cannot sell this house," I stated firmly, closing the distance between us. "The deed is in my name." Derek laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Actually, I can. I used the military power of attorney you gave me before your deployment. The sale closed yesterday afternoon. The buyers are a corporate holding company, and they paid straight cash." He checked his expensive watch. "In fact, Brittany and I are heading to the airport in a few hours. We are moving to Dubai tonight." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. A power of attorney was meant to allow him to handle basic emergencies while I was serving our country, not to liquidate my assets. "What about Mia?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. "You cannot just leave your 10-year-old daughter." "Oh, your sister and her husband are bringing her here soon to pick up her remaining boxes," Derek replied, waving his hand dismissively. "She is your problem now. By the way, I also cashed out her 529 college savings plan. Consider it my compensation for dealing with your deployments. Thanks for playing soldier for 10 years so I could finally build my empire." Brittany adjusted her designer handbag, looking me up and down with obvious disgust. "You should really look in a mirror," she sneered. "You have been gone for months, acting like a rugged grunt in that stiff uniform. You cannot blame a man for needing a real woman who actually stays home and knows how to treat him. You chose the military over him, so now we are taking the payout." The urge to break protocol and physically drag them both off my porch was overwhelming. I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing my military discipline to override my fury. I would not give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. Just then, a familiar black SUV pulled up to the curb. It was Jamal, my 34-year-old brother-in-law. Jamal is an African-American federal forensic accountant with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and he has always been fiercely protective of our family. The rear door opened, and my 10-year-old daughter Mia stepped out. She did not run to her father. She did not cry. Instead, she stared at Derek with absolute chilling disgust. Mia walked straight past him, coming directly to my side. She reached for my hand, and as she hugged me, I felt her slip a small hard object into my palm. It was a discreet USB flash drive. "Mom, do not worry," Mia whispered, her voice steady and confident. "We have got this handled." A police cruiser turned onto our street, its bright lights flashing against the gray sky. Derek smirked at me, slowly putting his expensive phone away. "I called the cops when your rideshare entered the neighborhood," he announced proudly. "Since this house belongs to a large corporate buyer, you are officially trespassing now." The two heavily armed officers walked briskly toward us. I stood tall, clutching the small flash drive tightly. I gathered my bag and turned toward Jamal's waiting car, knowing without a doubt that this bitter battle was far from over. The two police officers approached the porch with their hands resting near their duty belts. Derek immediately began waving his arms, pointing at me like I was a dangerous intruder rather than a woman who had just spent the last 10 years serving her country. "Officer, get her off my property!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "She is trespassing. The house belongs to a corporate holding company now, and she is refusing to leave." The older officer glanced at my uniform, taking in the rank insignia on my collar. He looked back at Derek, clearly unimpressed by his frantic energy. "Sir, lower your voice," the officer instructed firmly before turning to me. "Madam, do you have current proof of residence or ownership?" I kept my posture rigid and my expression entirely blank, drawing on every ounce of military discipline I possessed. "I will not cause any trouble, officer," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic Derek so desperately wanted to see. "My husband just informed me he utilized a power of attorney to execute a sale yesterday. I am stepping off the premises right now." "Are you seriously just going to let her walk to that car?" Derek demanded, stepping off the porch. "Check her bag. She probably stole something." The younger officer stepped squarely in front of Derek, physically blocking his path. "Sir, step back. The lady is complying with a civil eviction. You need to calm down or we will have a different conversation." I did not even look back at Derek or his smug mistress. I simply offered a crisp nod to the officers, turned on my heel, and marched toward the waiting SUV. Every single step I took was measured, precise, and entirely deliberate. I climbed inside and shut the door. As soon as Jamal pulled away from the curb, my phone began vibrating intensely in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Patricia flashing across the screen. My mother-in-law had never liked me, always making her disdain perfectly clear. I answered the call and put it on speaker so Jamal and Mia could hear. Patricia did not even say hello. "You forced him to do this by constantly deploying," she shrieked, her voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space of the vehicle. "A real woman stays home to take care of her family. You spent 10 years playing soldier while Derek was trying to build a business." I took a long, slow breath to steady myself. "He sold my house and stole the college fund, Patricia. Derek needed capital for his crypto firm, and you were holding him back financially," she snapped, entirely unapologetic. "You have always been far too masculine and rigid. It is no wonder he had to seek out a softer, more supportive partner like Brittany. He deserves success and happiness. You are legally his wife, so what belongs to you belongs to him. Do not you dare try to cause a scene or ruin his flight to Dubai tonight. If you try to stop him, I will personally hire lawyers to make sure you never see Mia again." Mia sat in the back seat, her hands resting quietly in her lap, completely unfazed by the incredibly vicious outburst. She had seen this behavior her entire life. Jamal, navigating the suburban streets with steady hands, tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tightly in suppressed anger. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my tone ice cold. "You listen to me, Riley," Patricia hissed. "You take that little payout Derek gave you and you disappear. If you drag his name through the mud, I will ruin whatever pathetic military career you have left. He is finally getting the empire he deserves." I ended the call without speaking, tossing the phone onto the center console. The silence in the car was heavy, thick with the unsaid reality of what had just happened. My own family had conspired against me, justifying theft and abandonment under the guise of supporting the grand delusions of Derek. But they had made one massive, irreversible miscalculation today. They foolishly assumed that I was completely unprepared for this exact situation. 10 minutes later, we arrived at the home of Jamal and Hannah. My older sister Hannah immediately wrapped her arms around me the second I walked through the door. She did not ask questions. She simply poured me a cup of strong black coffee and directed me to the kitchen island. Jamal did not waste a single second. My brother-in-law works as an African-American federal forensic accountant with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. His mind is sharper than a razor. He sat down at the table, flipped open his secure laptop, and extended his palm. Mia reached into her pocket and handed him the small USB drive she had smuggled out of the house. "I installed a keystroke logger on the iPad 3 weeks ago," Mia explained casually, taking a sip of orange juice. "He uses just one password." Jamal plugged the drive in. His fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced speed as he bypassed the basic security measures. Jamal opened the decrypted folder casually named Duyenmao 2_8, docx by Mia to hide it. As rows of financial data flooded the screen, Jamal leaned closer, his eyes narrowing behind his glasses. The silence in the kitchen grew heavy. "Riley, you need to see this," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a serious professional register. "Derek is not a successful cryptocurrency broker at all. His accounts are completely empty. He has been falsifying his returns for months." I stepped behind Jamal, staring at the glowing screen. "What exactly is this, Jamal?" "You are looking at a desperate man," Jamal replied, adjusting his glasses. "Derek is $600,000 in debt to dangerous offshore investors, and they are demanding immediate repayment. He is not moving to Dubai. He is fleeing the country to save his own life." I pulled up a chair next to Jamal, watching as he effortlessly navigated through the encrypted records Mia had managed to capture. His fingers moved with absolute precision, uncovering the digital footprint Derek had carelessly left behind. As an African-American federal auditor, who spent his days dismantling sophisticated financial crimes for the government, Jamal found Derek's sloppy attempts at concealment almost insulting. "Look here," Jamal said, pointing to a series of scanned documents that had been recently uploaded to a secure cloud server. "Derek did not just use the standard military power of attorney you signed before your deployment. He deliberately forged specific addendums to bypass the strict assumption clauses attached to your VA loan." I leaned in, my heart pounding steadily as I read the fraudulent text. "He completely altered the authorization limits," I whispered, realizing the depth of his betrayal. "Exactly," Jamal confirmed, his voice hard. "He needed to make it look like you had granted him unrestricted permission to liquidate the property without your physical presence or verbal confirmation. Because the house was tied to a federally backed VA loan, the bank required additional verification. Derek fabricated a digital trail of emails from your account using a VPN to make it appear as though you were responding from your naval base in Norfolk. He basically created a ghost version of you to authorize the transfer." Hannah stood behind us, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "He sold the house to a corporate buyer because cash transactions move faster and require less underwriting scrutiny," she deduced. Jamal nodded grimly. "The buyers are listed as Apex Holdings, LLC. They wired the purchase amount directly into a temporary escrow account Derek established last week. From there, he planned to route the funds through a series of offshore cryptocurrency wallets to pay back the investors he defrauded. He thought he could outsmart the federal banking system by moving the money overseas before you ever made it home from deployment. He underestimated your timing and your daughter's intelligence." Jamal brought up another screen, this one showing a dizzying array of crypto transactions. Derek had been hemorrhaging money for almost a year, chasing terrible investments and borrowing from loan sharks hiding behind legitimate-sounding shell companies. The pressure must have been immense, but his arrogance convinced him he could steal your hard-earned equity to clean up his massive mess. While Jamal documented the fraud, a cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I pulled out my phone and opened my primary banking application. My hands shook slightly as the dashboard loaded on the bright screen. I clicked on our joint checking account first. The available balance stared back at me in bold red numbers $0.00. I quickly swiped over to the joint savings account, praying that he had somehow missed it. Exactly zero. I was officially penniless on paper. 10 years of hazardous military deployments, completely missed holidays, and strict budgeting had been wiped out in a matter of days. A sudden wave of intense panic threatened to consume me as a realization hit me. The college fund. I gasped, my voice cracking, as I navigated to a different financial portal. I logged into the dedicated 529 plan I had established for Mia the year she was born. I had deposited every single bonus and combat pay allowance I earned into that account, ensuring she would never have to struggle to afford her education. The screen refreshed, and the sick feeling in my gut doubled. He took it all, I said, unable to tear my eyes away from the empty balance. Every single penny is gone. He deliberately stole his own innocent daughter's entire future just to cover his miserable gambling debts today. Hannah placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, but the rage burning inside my chest was entirely suffocating. I had survived combat zones and grueling training only to be financially destroyed by the man who was supposed to protect my family. Before I could spiral further into despair, a loud notification chime echoed from Hannah's phone resting on the kitchen counter. She picked it up, her brow furrowing in confusion as she read the incoming message. "Riley, this is an email forwarded from your old home address server," Hannah said, her tone laced with concern. "It is from the legal department of Apex Holdings, LLC, the corporate entity that just purchased your property." "What do they want?" I asked, wiping away a stray tear of frustration. Hannah skimmed the aggressive text. "They are demanding that you immediately hand over all remaining appliance warranties and the master security codes. The email states that if you fail to comply within 24 hours, they will initiate a massive civil lawsuit against you for breach of contract and property obstruction. They are threatening to sue you for thousands of dollars in daily penalties." Jamal stopped typing and slowly turned around in his chair. He reached out and took the phone from Hannah's hand. He carefully read through the threatening legal jargon, his eyes scanning the corporate signature and the wire transfer receipts attached to the bottom of the email thread. A slow, deeply satisfied smirk spread across his face as he pushed his glasses further up the bridge of his nose. He turned the phone around so I could see the glowing screen. "They messed up, Riley," Jamal said, his voice completely devoid of any worry. "They got greedy and incredibly arrogant. Look very closely at the routing number on this official wire transfer document." I leaned forward, wiping my eyes, and squinted at the tiny digital text displayed on the phone. At first, the string of numbers meant absolutely nothing to me. But as I read the associated bank name listed right below the routing digits, a sudden shock of recognition washed over me. I looked at Jamal, my heart racing again, but this time not from fear. I looked at Jamal, my heart racing again, but this time not from fear. The routing number belonged to our primary bank, the exact institution where Derek and I held our joint checking accounts and Mia's dedicated college fund. Jamal gave me a sharp, determined nod. It was time to go on the offensive. I did not bother changing out of my uniform. The crisp navy fabric and perfectly aligned ribbons were a reminder of who I was and the pressure I had survived. I drove straight to the bank, marching through the double-glass doors with a singular, unbreakable focus. The lobby was unusually quiet for a weekday afternoon, but my heavy combat boots against the pristine marble floor echoed like a steady drumbeat. I bypassed the tellers and walked directly into the corner office of Richard Henderson, the branch manager. Richard, an arrogant golfing buddy of Derek, preferred striking backdoor deals on the green rather than following strict banking protocols. He looked up from his monitors, feigning surprise as I stood before his desk. "Riley." "What a pleasant surprise," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair and steepling his fingers. "Derek told me you were coming home today. I assume you are here about the recent account transfers." I placed both hands flat on his desk and leaned in close. I am here to find out why my bank allowed a fraudulent power of attorney to authorize the liquidation of a protected 529 minor trust and the complete draining of a joint checking account without a single secondary verification call to me. Richard sighed heavily, adopting a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. Now, Riley, let us not use dangerous words like fraudulent. Derek presented a fully notarized military power of attorney. Under the legal limitations of that document, he had every right to transfer those funds. He is your husband and the designated financial agent. My hands are legally tied. Your hands are tied because you are covering for your golf partner, I replied smoothly. You authorized a massive offshore wire transfer without flagging it for suspicious activity. Richard stood up quickly, his face flushing with indignation as he dropped his polite facade. Look, you cannot just barge in here and make wild accusations. Maybe if you spent less time deploying across the world and more time actually being a present mother to your daughter, Derek would not have had to make these difficult financial decisions for your family. A 10-year vacation from motherhood wearing a uniform does not give you the right to dictate how a man manages his household. I did not flinch or look away. His toxic insult was exactly the misogynistic garbage Derek had been feeding his friends to mask his own failures. I stood perfectly straight, squaring my shoulders. My 10 years of service taught me how to identify a threat, Richard. I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. It also taught me federal regulations. Under the Bank Secrecy Act, any international wire transfer exceeding $10,000 requires a suspicious activity report, especially when the destination is a known offshore crypto exchange. Furthermore, the specific power of attorney Derek provided was for general household maintenance, not for the total liquidation of an irrevocable 529 minor trust, which strictly requires a court order or dual signature verification. You bypassed federal banking protocols to help your broke friend steal from a child. Richard swallowed hard, his arrogant posture instantly crumbling as the reality of his massive liability set in. I stepped around his desk, violating his personal space just enough to make him sweat nervously under his expensive collar. If you do not print me a complete, unredacted ledger of every single transaction Derek initiated in the last 48 hours, including the exact timestamps and routing destinations, my next stop is the regional director. After that, I will be contacting the Federal Reserve to report this specific branch for facilitating wire fraud and money laundering. Print the ledger right now. His hands shook visibly as he reached for his mouse, not daring to say another word. The heavy office printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out 3 crisp pages of dense financial data. He handed them to me without making eye contact. I snatched the papers from his hand and walked out of his office, stopping in the middle of the quiet lobby to review the damages. My eyes scanned the endless rows of debits, desperately looking for the specific fraudulent transactions that had completely destroyed my life. I found them halfway down the second page. There was the transfer for the $800,000 house sale, completely draining the temporary escrow. Right beneath it was the $150,000 withdrawal from Mia's college fund. Both massive sums had been bundled together into a single outbound wire transfer directed to a suspicious bank in Dubai. But as I traced my index finger across the line to the final column, my breath caught in my throat. I stopped breathing for a second as I read the small automated text printed in the status box. It did not say completed. It did not say cleared. The status read, pending international clearance. A fierce, victorious smile spread across my face. International wire transfers of that magnitude, especially to regions flagged for high cryptocurrency activity, required a mandatory 72-hour holding period. Derek genuinely thought he had already won. He was currently sitting at the airport drinking expensive champagne and celebrating his brilliant escape, absolutely certain that he was flying into a new life of limitless wealth. He had absolutely no idea that his stolen money was firmly stuck in digital purgatory. The funds had left our accounts, but had not yet reached his offshore wallet. He was about to board an international flight completely empty-handed, running toward a city where he owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to very dangerous people. I folded the ledger neatly and slid it into my uniform pocket. He had given me a window, and I was going to use it to slam the door shut entirely. He had given me a window, and I was going to use it to slam the door shut entirely. I drove straight back to Hannah and Jamal's house, the engine of my car roaring as I accelerated through the quiet suburban streets. I burst through their front door and slammed the printed ledger directly onto the kitchen island. Jamal leaned over the paperwork, his eyes scanning the columns, until he locked onto the final status code. He let out a sharp whistle of genuine admiration. "International clearance protocols are a beautiful thing," he said, tapping the paper. "The money is frozen in transit. But we have a major problem, Riley. If Derek logs into his temporary Dubai account from the airport and sees that the transfer is still pending, he might panic. He could try to cancel the wire, reroute it to a different shell company, or worse, he might skip his flight and disappear completely. We cannot let him check that account," I stated firmly, my mind rapidly switching into tactical mode. "We need him to board that plane believing he is untouchable. Once he is in the air, he will be completely unreachable for 14 hours, giving us all the time we need to freeze the receiving end." Jamal nodded in agreement. "We have to create a massive distraction. We need to feed his ego so much that he stops thinking about the money and starts obsessing over his victory. You need to play the victim, Riley. You have to make him believe you are utterly defeated." The mere thought of begging that miserable excuse for a man made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. I had spent a decade standing strong against adversaries refusing to show weakness. But this was an entirely different kind of battlefield, and the objective was securing my daughter's future. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my text messages. My hands hovered over the digital keyboard as I forced myself to swallow every ounce of pride I possessed. I typed out the exact words a broken, desperate woman would write. "Derek, please. Just leave me $5,000 for a rental deposit. You won. Please do not leave Mia with nothing." I stared at the pathetic message for a heavy second before pressing send. The response did not take long, but it was not a text message. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated with an incoming video file. Derek simply could not resist the opportunity to gloat in high definition. I pressed play, and the screen filled with the luxurious interior of the International Airport VIP lounge. Derek was sitting in a plush leather armchair wearing his perfectly tailored suit, a crystal flute of expensive champagne resting in his hand. Brittany was draped over his shoulder wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, laughing softly as she sipped her own drink. "Well, well, well," Derek sneered into the camera, his face flushed with arrogance and alcohol. "The tough military hero is finally begging. It is a little too late for negotiations, Riley. You spent 10 years giving orders, and now you are asking for handouts." He took a slow, dramatic sip of his champagne, making sure the VIP lounge logo was visible behind him. $5,000 for a deposit. You should have thought about that before you chose the Navy over your husband. I am not leaving you a single dime. Brittany leaned into the frame, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Have fun at the motel," she mocked, waving her manicured fingers at the lens. "We are going to go enjoy our new life." Derek chuckled, a harsh and grating sound. "You lost Riley. Deal with it." The video cut to black. My jaw was clenched so tightly my teeth ached. I wanted to hurl my phone straight through the kitchen window. Hannah placed a comforting hand on my arm, but before either of us could speak, Mia suddenly shoved her chair back. She lunged forward and snatched the phone directly out of my hand. "Mom, do not delete that," Mia demanded, her eyes wide with intense focus. She quickly mirrored my phone screen to the large television mounted on the living room wall. "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, watching my brilliant 10-year-old daughter manipulate the remote control. She paused the video just seconds before it ended, right when Derek took his final sip of champagne. "He is a complete idiot," Mia stated flatly. "Look behind his left shoulder." Jamal and I stepped closer to the television screen. Sitting on a small glass table just behind Derek was his open laptop. It was slightly out of focus, but Mia was already working. She opened a specialized enhancement application on her own tablet, syncing it to the television. She isolated the background, adjusting the contrast and sharpening the pixel density with practiced, rapid movements. the blurry rectangle slowly resolved into a clear, readable image. Jamal practically leaped forward, pulling his glasses off in sheer disbelief. He actually left his banking dashboard open in a public video, Jamal muttered, shaking his head. He is sitting on the confirmation page. I stared at the screen, reading the distinct corporate logo of the Dubai financial institution. Not only was the exact bank name visible, but the URL bar clearly displayed the unique portal address, and a small diagnostic window in the corner of his screen revealed his active session IP address. He was waiting for the funds to clear while recording his victory lap. Jamal pulled his own laptop closer, a predatory smile forming on his face. "They messed up, Riley," Jamal said softly. "With this specific portal address and the routing data from the bank ledger, I can contact my counterparts at Interpol and the Federal Wire Fraud Division. We are going to freeze that account before his plane even reaches cruising altitude." I folded the ledger neatly and slid it into my uniform pocket. He had given me a window, and I was going to use it to slam the door shut entirely. I drove straight back to Hannah and Jamal's house, the engine of my car roaring as I accelerated through the quiet suburban streets. I burst through their front door and slammed the printed ledger directly onto the kitchen island. Jamal leaned over the paperwork, his eyes scanning the columns until he locked onto the final status code. He let out a sharp whistle of genuine admiration. "International clearance protocols are a beautiful thing," he said, tapping the paper. "The money is frozen in transit. But we have a major problem, Riley. If Derek logs into his temporary Dubai account from the airport and sees that the transfer is still pending, he might panic. He could try to cancel the wire, reroute it to a different shell company, or worse, he might skip his flight and disappear completely. We cannot let him check that account," I stated firmly, my mind rapidly switching into tactical mode. "We need him to board that plane believing he is untouchable. Once he is in the air, he will be completely unreachable for 14 hours, giving us all the time we need to freeze the receiving end." Jamal nodded in agreement. "We have to create a massive distraction. We need to feed his ego so much that he stops thinking about the money and starts obsessing over his victory. You need to play the victim, Riley. You have to make him believe you are utterly defeated." The mere thought of begging that miserable excuse for a man made my stomach churn with absolute disgust. I had spent a decade standing strong against adversaries refusing to show weakness. But this was an entirely different kind of battlefield, and the objective was securing my daughter's future. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened my text messages. My hands hovered over the digital keyboard as I forced myself to swallow every ounce of pride I possessed. I typed out the exact words a broken, desperate woman would write. "Derek, please. Just leave me $5,000 for a rental deposit. You won. Please do not leave Mia with nothing." I stared at the pathetic message for a heavy second before pressing send. The response did not take long, but it was not a text message. 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated with an incoming video file. Derek simply could not resist the opportunity to gloat in high definition. I pressed play, and the screen filled with the luxurious interior of the International Airport VIP lounge. Derek was sitting in a plush leather armchair wearing his perfectly tailored suit, a crystal flute of expensive champagne resting in his hand. Brittany was draped over his shoulder, wearing oversized designer sunglasses indoors, laughing softly as she sipped her own drink. "Well, well, well," Derek sneered into the camera, his face flushed with arrogance and alcohol. "The tough military hero is finally begging. It is a little too late for negotiations, Riley. You spent 10 years giving orders and now you are asking for handouts." He took a slow, dramatic sip of his champagne, making sure the VIP lounge logo was visible behind him. $5,000 for a deposit. You should have thought about that before you chose the Navy over your husband. I am not leaving you a single dime." Brittany leaned into the frame, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Have fun at the motel," she mocked, waving her manicured fingers at the lens. "We are going to go enjoy our new life." Derek chuckled, a harsh and grating sound. "You lost Riley. Deal with it." The video cut to black. My jaw was clenched so tightly my teeth ached. I wanted to hurl my phone straight through the kitchen window. Hannah placed a comforting hand on my arm, but before either of us could speak, Mia suddenly shoved her chair back. She lunged forward and snatched the phone directly out of my hand. "Mom, do not delete that," Mia demanded, her eyes wide with intense focus. She quickly mirrored my phone screen to the large television mounted on the living room wall. "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, watching my brilliant 10-year-old daughter manipulate the remote control. She paused the video just seconds before it ended, right when Derek took his final sip of champagne. "He is a complete idiot," Mia stated flatly. "Look behind his left shoulder." Jamal and I stepped closer to the television screen. Sitting on a small glass table just behind Derek was his open laptop. It was slightly out of focus, but Mia was already working. She opened a specialized enhancement application on her own tablet, syncing it to the television. She isolated the background, adjusting the contrast, and sharpening the pixel density with practiced rapid movements. The blurry rectangle slowly resolved into a clear, readable image. Jamal practically leaped forward, pulling his glasses off in sheer disbelief. "He actually left his banking dashboard open in a public video," Jamal muttered, shaking his head. "He is sitting on the confirmation page." I stared at the screen, reading the distinct corporate logo of the Dubai financial institution. Not only was the exact bank name visible, but the URL bar clearly displayed the unique portal address, and a small diagnostic window in the corner of his screen revealed his active session IP address. He was waiting for the funds to clear while recording his victory lap. Jamal pulled his own laptop closer, a predatory smile forming on his face. "They messed up, Riley," Jamal said softly. "With this specific portal address and the routing data from the bank ledger, I can contact my counterparts at Interpol and the Federal Wire Fraud Division. We are going to freeze that account before his plane even reaches cruising altitude." Jamal's fingers hovered over his keyboard, ready to initiate the federal lock on Derek's incoming transfer. Before he could strike the final key, a violent rhythmic pounding echoed through the front hallway. The heavy strikes against the wood were frantic and aggressive. Hannah frowned, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she walked toward the entryway. The second she unlocked the deadbolt, the heavy oak door was violently shoved open. Patricia marched into the foyer, her designer heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She was completely out of breath, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from the 2-hour drive across state lines from her home in Massachusetts. She did not bother greeting anyone or apologizing for the intrusion. Instead, she marched straight into the kitchen, glaring at me with absolute contempt, and slapped a thick stack of legal documents onto the granite island right next to Jamal's laptop. "Sign it!" Patricia demanded, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "I am putting an end to this ridiculous vendetta right now." I glanced down at the papers. The top page featured the cheap generic letterhead of a strip mall attorney Derek had used years ago for a minor traffic violation. It was a formal cease and desist letter, heavily padded with aggressive but legally baseless threats. Attached to it was a hastily drafted post-nuptial agreement. I skimmed the first paragraph with practiced military detachment. The document demanded that I immediately cease all harassment of Derek, relinquish any claim to the funds from the house sale, and officially forgive all marital debts he had incurred. The contract insanely classified his massive offshore crypto losses as a joint family venture that I was now entirely responsible for settling. "You want me to sign a document absolving your son of a massive federal crime?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and entirely unbothered by her manic energy. "He is not a criminal." Patricia shrieked, her face turning an angry shade of red as she slammed her hand against the counter. "He is a financial visionary who simply needed immediate capital to secure his investments. You are the one harassing him. You showed up at the house today in that ridiculous uniform to terrorize him and his new partner. You are trying to sabotage his fresh start in Dubai out of pure, bitter jealousy. You sign that paper forgiving the debts, or my lawyer will file a restraining order against you by tomorrow morning." I did not even flinch at her baseless threats, my discipline keeping my emotions entirely locked down. I simply stared at her, letting the silence stretch until her false bravado began to fracture. But my refusal to engage only infuriated her more. Unable to shatter my composure, Patricia turned her venomous glare toward my 10-year-old daughter. Mia was standing near the refrigerator holding a glass of juice, watching her grandmother with quiet observation. "This is exactly why your father had to leave you," Patricia sneered, stepping aggressively toward my child, her voice dripping with calculated cruelty. "Your mother is a cold, unnatural woman. Her masculine career destroyed this home. She spent 10 years wearing combat boots and barking orders instead of providing a warm, nurturing environment. Your father needed a real woman to love him, Mia. A woman who knows her place. Do not ever grow up to be a bitter, rigid failure like her." Before I could even step forward, Hannah moved with lightning speed. My older sister inserted herself directly between Patricia and Mia, her eyes blazing with fierce protective fury. "You take one more step toward my niece, and I will physically throw you out of this house," Hannah warned, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Riley sacrificed a decade of her life to defend this country and provide a beautiful life for that pathetic excuse of a man. Derek lived off her paychecks, slept in a house she bought, and pretended to be a genius while secretly drowning in debt. Derek is a cowardly thief who stole his own child's college fund to pay off dangerous loan sharks. Do not you dare stand in my kitchen and blame my sister for his criminal failures. Patricia scoffed, attempting to maintain her air of superiority, but I could see her confidence wavering slightly under Hannah's intense glare. She reached for the legal documents on the counter, intending to shove them back into my face to force the issue. However, Jamal smoothly intercepted her. He politely took the cease and desist letter from the Granite Island, his expression completely unreadable. He scanned the cheap legal jargon, examining the specific dates the type demands regarding the offshore financial transfers and the notary stamp at the bottom of the page. A slow, highly amused smile spread across his face. Jamal adjusted his glasses, looking at Patricia with the calm, predatory focus of a federal investigator who had just cornered his primary target. "Patricia, you live in Boston, correct?" Jamal asked conversationally, his tone pleasant but sharp. "Of course I do," she snapped, clearly confused by the sudden change in subject. "I drove 2 hours down here to Connecticut to handle this mess because Riley refuses to be reasonable and let my son leave in peace." Jamal tapped the documents against the counter, his smirk widening as he looked her directly in the eyes. "You really should not have brought this across state lines," Jamal said softly, his words carrying the heavy weight of absolute authority. Patricia blinked, her brow furrowing. "What are you talking about?" "This document explicitly demands that Riley surrender her rights to funds obtained through a fraudulent real estate transaction and the illegal liquidation of a federally protected 529 minor trust," Jamal explained, speaking slowly as if addressing a toddler. "The money your son stole was moved using interstate banking channels. By physically driving from Massachusetts to Connecticut to deliver a coercive legal document designed to protect stolen funds and facilitate an ongoing financial crime, you just crossed a massive legal threshold. Patricia, you just made yourself an active accessory to federal wire fraud and interstate extortion." The remaining color instantly drained from Patricia's face. Her mouth opened and closed in silent, absolute panic as her eyes darted from the documents in Jamal's hand to my entirely unbothered expression. The arrogant superiority she had marched in with evaporated into sheer terror. She realized she had just blindly walked into a trap of her own making. She snatched her designer handbag from the counter, spun around on her heels, and practically ran toward the front door, leaving the incriminating legal documents resting squarely in the hands of a federal auditor. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a resounding thud, cutting off the frantic clicking of Patricia fleeing down the driveway. Hannah let out a long, shaky breath, the adrenaline of defending her niece slowly leaving her system. Jamal simply shook his head, looking down at the discarded legal documents Patricia had abandoned on the Granite Island. He chuckled softly, amused by the sheer panic he had easily induced with basic federal statutes. The kitchen settled into a heavy, expectant silence, but I did not feel an ounce of panic. The despair that had threatened to consume me just an hour ago was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, tactical clarity that 10 years of military service had hardwired into my brain. I walked past the useless cease and desist letter, leaving it untouched on the counter, and walked straight over to my heavy canvas duffel bag. I reached past my neatly folded uniforms and pulled out a sleek, ruggedized laptop. This was not the standard personal computer I used for family video calls or casual browsing. This was an encrypted, air-gapped machine I utilized strictly for my private financial maneuvering. I carried it back to the kitchen island, setting it down next to Jamal's device. I powered it on rapidly, keying in a complex alphanumeric password that immediately bypassed the primary firewalls. Jamal leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, as he watched me with professional curiosity. Hannah poured herself a fresh glass of water, her eyes darting between my screen and my focused expression. I opened a secure browser and navigated straight to the Delaware Division of Corporations Registry portal. My fingers moved swiftly, entering a series of authentication codes to access a private corporate dashboard. The screen loaded instantly, displaying a vault of digitized legal paperwork. I clicked on a specific subfolder and pulled up the official ownership documents, the articles of incorporation, and the primary operating agreement for Apex Holdings, LLC. I opened the master file, enlarging the text so the corporate seal and the executive signatures were perfectly legible on the bright screen. I did not say a word as I scrolled past the registered agent information and highlighted the designated managing member of the holding company. I turned the rugged laptop around, angling the screen so Hannah and Jamal could read the document clearly. Jamal leaned in, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. His eyes scanned the legal text, absorbing the corporate structure before locking onto the final signature block. His jaw actually dropped. He looked up at me, utterly speechless, for the first time since I had arrived. Hannah stepped closer, reading the screen over her husband's shoulder. Derek thought he was an absolute genius. I explained, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. He was backed into a corner by loan sharks, and he needed liquid cash immediately. He used a highly questionable underground real estate broker to find a corporate cash buyer who would close the sale in under 24 hours without asking any annoying questions about his heavily forged power of attorney. He was so desperate to bypass me and liquidate the property that he accepted the very first automated cash offer the broker presented. I tapped the screen, pointing directly at the corporate registry. But Derek did not realize that the shady broker he hired was incredibly lazy. The broker simply fed the property listing into an automated purchasing algorithm, an algorithm that I personally built and funded. Apex Holdings, LLC, is not a random conglomerate. It is a private shell company I set up over a year ago, using my accumulated hazard pay housing allowances and deployment bonuses. I knew Derek was financially erratic, and I needed an invisible safety net. When his broker listed my house for a fire sale price, my own holding company automatically bought it. Hannah gripped the edge of the granite counter, her eyes wide with sudden, brilliant realization. She looked from the laptop to me, a massive smile breaking across her face. Jamal let out a loud, echoing laugh that filled the entire kitchen. He slammed his hand flat against the island, shaking his head in pure disbelief. "You control the LLC," Jamal stated, mapping out the financial reality of the situation aloud. "That means the buyer escrow account holding the purchase funds does not belong to a third party. It belongs entirely to you." I nodded, a sharp, predatory satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Derek is currently sitting in the Dubai Airport VIP lounge, drinking expensive champagne and waiting for an $800,000 wire transfer to hit his offshore account. He genuinely believes that money is coming from a wealthy foreign investor who wanted a quick real estate flip. In reality, those funds are permanently locked inside my own corporate escrow vault. I initiated the 72-hour international hold myself, just to keep him exactly where I wanted him. Jamal pulled his own laptop closer, syncing the timeline of events. Derek just used a forged federal document to illegally sell a house to his own wife, Jamal. Summarized, completely amazed. He legally transferred the full property deed to a company you completely control, and he did it entirely for free. In the process, He handed us airtight documented evidence of his federal forgery and interstate wire fraud. He has absolutely nothing, I confirmed. My checking accounts might be empty on paper, but I own the house free and clear of his name, and my corporate accounts are completely untouched. Derek has $0, no property, and a one-way ticket to a foreign country where his violent creditors are waiting on the tarmac to collect a debt he cannot pay. He thought he was destroying my life, but he just signed his own financial death warrant. 7,000 miles away from our kitchen, blissfully unaware of the trap snapping shut around him, Derek was busy playing the role of an untouchable expatriate. He and Brittany strolled through the glittering duty-free concourse of the international terminal, killing time before their first-class boarding call. Brittany dragged him into the Cartier boutique, her eyes locked on a $12,000 alligator skin handbag displayed under a pristine glass case. She did not even bother checking the price tag or asking for his permission. She simply pointed at the bag, gave Derek a sugary, expectant smile, and carried it straight to the register. Derek handed the sales associate his sleek black platinum credit card, with practiced arrogance, leaning against the glass counter like he owned the entire airport. The associate ran the card through the terminal. A harsh beep echoed through the quiet, luxurious boutique. The associate frowned, apologizing politely, and swiped it a second time. Another sharp, unforgiving beep rejected the transaction. Derek rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed by the inconvenience, and pulled a different premium card from his leather wallet. He tossed it onto the counter, muttering a loud complaint about overzealous international security triggers. The associate inserted the chip. A red light flashed immediately. Declined. Brittany's sugary smile vanished, replaced by a harsh scowl, as the other wealthy patrons in the boutique turned to watch the spectacle. She aggressively whispered at Derek, demanding he fix the embarrassment immediately. Derek's face flushed a deep mottled red. He snapped at the associate, claiming their machines were malfunctioning, but his voice lacked its usual booming confidence. The first sliver of genuine doubt was beginning to pierce through his alcoholic haze. He pulled out a third card, a corporate expense account he had sworn never to touch, and shoved it into the reader. Declined. The associate politely asked them to step aside for paying customers. Brittany let out an indignant huff, dropping the handbag on the counter and storming out of the boutique. She crossed her arms, her designer luggage sitting uselessly by her feet. This was not the lavish escape he had promised her. Derek snatched his useless plastic cards, his heart rate spiking as he jogged after her, ignoring her loud protests about leaving empty-handed. Storming toward a quiet, isolated corner of the VIP lounge, Derek dropped his briefcase onto a glass table and ripped his laptop out. His hands were actually shaking as he flipped open the screen and frantically logged back into his offshore banking portal. He hammered the refresh key, fully expecting to see the pending status updated to a cleared, multi-million-dollar balance. Instead, the screen flashed bright red with critical alert notifications. He squinted at the dashboard, his mind refusing to process the words displayed in bold, unforgiving text. Next to the $800,000 wire transfer from the house sale, the status read, "Frozen escrow discrepancy." Derek stopped breathing. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He frantically scrolled down to the second transaction, the $150,000 stolen directly from Mia's 529 minor trust. Next to that amount, an even more terrifying alert glared back at him. Frozen, IRSCID hold. He knew exactly what those acronyms meant. The Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service had locked the college funds. His master plan was completely disintegrating in real time. The money was not just delayed, it was actively seized by federal authorities. He had zero available credit, zero cash, and he was 90 minutes away from boarding a flight to a city where violent, unforgiving creditors were expecting immediate payment upon his arrival. The men he owed money to did not care about wire delays or bank errors. They only cared about untraceable cryptocurrency hitting their digital wallets. If he landed in the United Arab Emirates empty-handed, he would not survive the week. Panic clawed at his throat. He desperately pulled up the real estate closing documents from his email, frantically searching for a way to fix the primary transaction and force the escrow to release his cash. Derek scanned the digital paperwork, his eyes frantically darting across the dense legal paragraphs until he finally found the contact information for the buyer. Apex Holdings, LLC, listed a single corporate phone number at the very bottom of the escrow agreement. He did not hesitate for a single second. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed the number, his thumb pressing the screen with manic, desperate aggression. He was ready to scream at whatever mid-level corporate clerk answered the phone, fully intending to threaten them with catastrophic lawsuits if they did not release his funds immediately. He paced back and forth in the lounge, listening to the agonizing ringtone, his breathing shallow and rapid. Back in Jamal's kitchen, the heavy, victorious silence was shattered by a sharp electronic ringtone. It was not my personal cell phone. It was the dedicated business line for my holding company, routed directly through a secure application on my encrypted laptop. I stared at the incoming caller ID flashing brightly on the screen. It was Derek's personal cell number. The electronic ring chimed a second time, loud and demanding. Mia looked up from her tablet, a fierce smile mirroring my own. Jamal crossed his arms, leaning back against the granite counter with a look of pure, unadulterated anticipation. Hannah covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with shock and absolute glee. They both knew exactly who was calling and why. I reached out and tapped the accept button, putting the call on speakerphone so his panic could fill the room. The line connected, and I could hear Derek's ragged, heavy breathing echoing through the speakers before he even had a chance to yell. I cleared my throat, channeling every ounce of my command presence, and spoke with absolute terrifying calm. Apex Holdings. CEO speaking. How can I help you, Derek? Apex Holdings. CEO speaking. How can I help you, Derek? The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an endless, terrifying void, desperately trying to understand how the ground beneath him had vanished. I could hear his shallow, panicked breaths, the faint background noise of the airport terminal, and the frantic clicking of his keyboard as he desperately refreshed his banking portal. Riley. Derek finally managed, his voice trembling, stripped of all its usual bravado and arrogance. What did you do? What did you do to the money? I did not do anything, Derek, I replied, my voice chillingly calm, echoing the disciplined authority I used during combat deployments. You did this entirely to yourself. You assumed I was just a tired, distracted mother you could easily bypass. You were so desperate to escape your massive gambling debts that you used a completely illegal forged military power of attorney to initiate an unauthorized sale of my house. He stammered, the panic escalating into pure terror. I sold the house to a corporate buyer. I have the digital closing documents. The escrow account is holding my $800,000. You cannot stop it. I have the signed paperwork. You do have the paperwork, I agreed smoothly, watching Jamal smile as he tracked the active hold protocols on his laptop. And that paperwork proves that you legally transferred the deed of the property to Apex Holdings, LLC, the corporate shell company that I personally created and fully fund. You did not sell the house to a wealthy foreign investor, Derek. You sold my house to my own company. The escrow account holding that money is my corporate vault. You just handed me sole undisputed ownership of the property completely free of charge while simultaneously committing textbook federal forgery. No, 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 Derek shouted into the phone, the sound of his fist slamming against a glass table echoing through the speaker. You cannot do this. You cannot freeze that money. I need that cash right now, Riley. You do not understand the people I owe. They will not wait. They are going to kill me. That sounds like a personal problem, I stated, entirely unmoved by his sudden desperate realization of his own mortality. I spent 10 years dealing with actual threats. Your shady offshore loan sharks are not my concern. I still have the college fund, Derek screamed, pivoting to his last remaining lifeline, his voice cracking with hysteria. I drained Mia's 529 trust. That was $150,000. You cannot stop that transfer. It is already processing through the clearinghouse. Once that money hits my account, I am gone. Jamal leaned forward, positioning himself directly in front of the speakerphone. He adjusted his glasses, adopting his most professional, intimidating federal tone. Actually, Derek, this is Special Agent Jamal Davis. With the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Jamal said smoothly, his voice radiating absolute authority. I am afraid you are severely misinformed regarding the status of those funds. Withdrawing money from an irrevocable minor's trust using forged custodial documents is not just a standard banking error. It is a Class C federal felony. What? Derek gasped, the sound of his breath hitching audibly over the line. That transaction triggered an immediate IRSCID. Hold the second it attempted to cross international lines, Jamal continued, his tone clinical and detached. The entire $150,000 has been seized by federal authorities pending a full criminal investigation into your illegal activities. You have zero access to those funds. You have zero access to the escrow money. Your accounts are frozen, your assets are seized, and you are currently standing in an international airport holding a boarding pass bought with stolen money. Enjoy Dubai, Derek. If you can even get on the plane without being detained by customs. Derek let out a guttural, terrifying scream of pure rage and absolute panic. I ended the call, cutting off his hysterical shouting, and dropped my phone onto the granite kitchen island. Hannah let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head in amazement. Jamal leaned back, closing his laptop with a sharp, satisfying click. He is completely trapped, Jamal said, a satisfied smile on his face. He cannot move forward, and he cannot go back. But a cornered animal is incredibly dangerous, I replied, my military instincts keeping me grounded. He is not going to just sit in that airport and accept defeat. He is going to lash out. He is going to call the only person who has ever enabled his toxic behavior. Miles away in the airport lounge, Derek was practically hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he stared at the frozen banking dashboard, the red alert text burning into his retinas. He had no money. He had no escape. He was entirely exposed. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling violently, and dialed the only number he knew by heart. The phone rang twice before Patricia answered, her voice still shaky from her own humiliating encounter at Jamal's house. Mom, you have to fix this! Derek screamed into the phone, completely abandoning any pretense of control. Riley set a trap. She froze the escrow account. The federal government seized the college fund. I have absolutely nothing. The men in Dubai are waiting for the wire transfer, Mom. If I land without the money, they are going to kill me. You have to go to Riley right now. You have to force her to drop the fraud claims, make her sign the release documents. Do whatever it takes, Mom, or I am dead. Patricia gripped her steering wheel. The panic she had felt at Jamal's house instantly transforming into a manic, desperate mission to save her son. She slammed her foot on the accelerator, her luxury SUV tearing out of the coffee shop parking lot where she had retreated. She did not care about the legal threats. She did not care about the federal statutes Jamal had warned her about. She only cared that her golden child was in danger. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white, and sped directly back toward Hannah and Jamal's quiet suburban neighborhood, fully prepared to tear the house apart to force my hand. Patricia's silver SUV careened onto the quiet tree-lined street, the tires squealing harshly against the asphalt as she jammed the brakes. She swerved into the driveway of Jamal and Hannah's residence, fully intending to march straight up to the front door and demand immediate compliance. However, her aggressive approach was instantly halted by a formidable black wrought iron security gate that stood firmly between the driveway and the sprawling property. Jamal did not take his home security lightly, and the perimeter was completely secured by an 8-foot privacy fence. Patricia laid on the horn, the blaring sound shattering the peaceful suburban afternoon. She held her hand flat against the steering wheel, waiting for someone to rush out and grant her entry. When the front door remained firmly shut, her panic mutated into unfiltered, irrational rage. She kicked her car door open and marched toward the gate, her designer heels clicking frantically against the pavement. She grabbed the cold metal bars and rattled them with all her strength, screaming my name at the top of her lungs. The gate did not budge. Desperation completely overrode her usual manicured elegance. She threw her expensive leather handbag onto the grass and actually hoisted herself up onto the first horizontal crossbar of the gate. Her tailored skirt caught on a decorative iron scroll, ripping upward with a loud tear, but she did not stop. She clumsily pulled herself higher, her manicured nails scraping against the dark metal as she struggled to swing her leg over the top. "You are destroying my son!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Her face was flushed purple, her hair falling out of its pristine style and clinging to her sweaty forehead. "You manipulative, vindictive wretch! You fix this right now. You call the bank and give him his money back. He is going to be killed and it will be your fault. You are nothing but a parasite trying to ruin a good man. I will tear you apart, Riley. I will ruin you." She kicked wildly, her heels slipping off the iron bar, leaving her dangling awkwardly. Her torn skirt flapped in the breeze as she continued to hurl a barrage of vicious, unhinged obscenities over the fence. The heavy oak front door swung open smoothly. I stepped out onto the expansive wrap-around porch, the wooden floorboards completely silent under my bare feet. I held a steaming ceramic mug of chamomile tea in my right hand, taking a slow, measured sip as I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the front lawn, creating a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unfolding at the security gate. I did not raise my voice. I did not react to her venomous insults. I simply watched Patricia dangle helplessly from the wrought iron bars, like a feral animal caught in a snare. Her face contorted with fresh fury as she spotted me standing there completely unbothered by her manic display. She doubled down on her screaming, thrashing against the gate in a desperate attempt to climb over. With my free hand, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened the camera application, angled the lens perfectly to capture her unhinged behavior, and tapped the red record button. The bright red timer began ticking upward on the screen, documenting every single threat, every curse word, and every frantic kick. "You owe him that money," Patricia howled, her voice hoarse and raw. "I demand you let me in right now." I took another calm sip of my tea, savoring the warmth, and lowered the mug. My voice was steady, projecting clearly across the manicured lawn. "Keep going, Patricia," I called out, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "The police are already on their way." The faint, approaching wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet before she could even process my words. Red and blue lights flashed against the surrounding trees as two local police cruisers turned the corner and sped toward the driveway. They came to an abrupt halt, directly behind Patricia's haphazardly parked SUV. The doors swung open, and I immediately recognized the two patrol officers stepping out of the lead vehicle. They were the exact same officers who had stood in my living room just days ago, the ones who had apologetically enforced Derek's forged eviction notice. Their expressions instantly morphed from professional caution to absolute bewilderment as they recognized me standing peacefully on the porch and then looked at the frantic woman currently tangled in the top of the security gate. "Ma'am, step down from the gate immediately," the lead officer ordered, his hand resting firmly on his utility belt. Patricia froze, her eyes darting frantically from the police officers to me. "Officers, you have to arrest her," Patricia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is stealing from my son. She is a criminal." The heavy front door opened again and Jamal stepped out onto the porch to stand beside me. He did not say a word to Patricia. He simply walked down the porch steps, retrieved a sleek black leather wallet from his interior jacket pocket, and flipped it open. The bright gold shield of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network caught the afternoon light. "Special Agent Davis," Jamal stated clearly, presenting his federal credentials to the local officers. "We have a hostile individual attempting to breach the perimeter of a federal agent's private residence, making documented threats of physical violence, and demanding access to funds currently seized in an active federal money laundering investigation." The local officers did not hesitate. They moved in swiftly, pulling a protesting, hysterical Patricia down from the wrought iron gate. The sharp click of metal handcuffs echoed loudly across the driveway. Patricia sobbed uncontrollably, her designer clothes ruined and her dignity shattered as the officers forcefully guided her into the cramped plastic back seat of the police cruiser. 7,000 miles away from Patricia's spectacular and highly publicized downfall, Derek was experiencing a catastrophic implosion of his own. He paced the plush, soundproofed carpeting of the International VIP lounge, his cell phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles had turned a sickly shade of white. He had dialed his mother's number 6 distinct times in the last 10 minutes. Every single call had rolled directly to her automated voicemail. He had absolutely no idea that Patricia was currently sitting in the back of a police cruiser, her designer skirt torn and her wrists tightly bound in steel cuffs. He only knew that his final desperate lifeline had been completely severed. Derek stared blindly at the glowing departure monitors suspended overhead. The first-class flight to Dubai was scheduled for boarding in less than 40 minutes. A cold, clammy sweat soaked through the collar of his expensive tailored shirt. He felt a sudden sharp tap on his shoulder and spun around to find Brittany glaring at him, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She had abandoned the Cartier boutique and tracked him down, and her expression was absolutely venomous. She demanded to know why his supposedly unlimited platinum cards were bouncing like cheap plastic. She demanded to know where the private car service was, where the luxury upgrades were, and why he was hyperventilating like a cornered animal in the middle of the airport. Derek desperately tried to deploy his usual arrogant charm. He plastered on a fake reassuring smile, holding his hands up in a placating gesture, and spun a frantic lie about a temporary security hold on his international accounts. He swore to her that it would be fully resolved the second they landed in the Emirates. Brittany was exceedingly vain, but she was not stupid. Her eyes darted past his shoulder, landing directly on the open laptop he had carelessly left glowing on the glass coffee table. She shoved past his outstretched arms and stared down at the screen. The bright red alert notifications were impossible to misinterpret. Frozen. IRSCID hold. Escrow discrepancy. She slowly turned back to face him, her meticulously manicured appearance dropping entirely to reveal a core of pure, unadulterated rage. She realized in an instant that the luxurious, untouchable future Derek had promised her was a complete fabrication. He was not a wealthy expatriate escaping a bitter ex-wife. He was a desperate broke fugitive actively being hunted by the federal government. The grand illusion shattered instantly, and Brittany made her exit strategy abundantly clear. "You lied to me," Brittany hissed, her voice vibrating with a dangerous escalating pitch. "You told me you had millions locked away. You told me this was a clean break and that we were stepping into a life of absolute luxury." Derek reached for her arm, frantically begging her to keep her voice down, but his rising panic only fueled her fury. She violently slapped his hand away, taking a deliberate step backward into the center of the crowded VIP lounge. If Derek thought she was going to quietly absorb this humiliation and walk away, he was disastrously mistaken. Brittany wanted blood, and she wanted an audience to witness her exact her revenge. "He is completely broke!" Brittany screamed, her voice echoing off the high architectural ceilings and instantly silencing the ambient chatter of the surrounding travelers. Every head in the exclusive lounge snapped in their direction. Business executives lowered their financial newspapers. Wealthy couples paused their conversations, turning in their leather armchairs to watch. Derek shrank back, his face draining of all color, as he desperately shushed her, glancing wildly at the lounge attendants who were already reaching for their security radios. "Do not shush me, you absolute fraud," Brittany yelled, leaning into the public spectacle with theatrical vengeance. "You do not have a single dollar to your name. You owe hundreds of thousands to underground crypto loan sharks. You promised me a penthouse in Dubai, but you are literally running for your life because violent creditors are hunting you down to collect your gambling debts." Derek looked around wildly, utterly trapped under the piercing, judgmental stares of 50 strangers. He lunged forward to grab his laptop, but Brittany snatched it first, holding the illuminated screen up for the nearest row of passengers to clearly see. "He is under federal investigation," she announced loudly, relishing the sheer irreparable destruction she was causing. He forged legal documents to steal his own child's college fund, and the IRS just seized every single penny. He is not a rich investor. He is a pathetic criminal going straight to federal prison. She slammed the laptop back onto the glass table with enough force to crack the screen right down the middle. She grabbed the handle of her designer carry-on bag, shot Derek one final look of absolute burning disgust, and stormed out of the lounge. She left him completely exposed, bankrupt, and entirely alone under the harsh glare of the airport lights. I watched the entire spectacular meltdown unfold from 30 feet away. Jamal, Hannah, and I stood near the frosted glass entrance of the International Lounge, perfectly positioned to witness the magnificent, unhindered self-destruction of Derek's life. Jamal had used his federal credentials to track the CID hold triggers, flagging Derek's exact location and flight itinerary in real time. We had driven straight to the airport effortlessly, bypassing standard security protocols, thanks to Jamal's federal badge arriving just in time to catch Brittany's explosive, highly public betrayal. Hannah leaned against Jamal, a look of profound, healing satisfaction settling across her features. She watched the woman who had helped destroy her sister's marriage completely eviscerate Derek in front of a captivated audience. Jamal stood with his hands casually resting in his pockets, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, monitoring the situation with the cold detachment of a seasoned agent who knew the target was already neutralized. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. 10 years of military service had taught me how to identify a threat, neutralize it, and definitively confirm the target's inability to retaliate. Derek had tried to systematically dismantle my life, steal my home, and ruin my daughter's future. Now he was experiencing the exact devastation he had so arrogantly planned for me. Derek stood frozen in the center of the lounge, staring blankly at the cracked, useless screen of his laptop. His shoulders slumped, and the arrogant, untouchable posture he had carried for years completely evaporated. He looked exactly like what he was, a broken, desperate man with absolutely nowhere left to run. Slowly, as if sensing the heavy, unyielding weight of my gaze, Derek turned his head toward the lounge entrance. His bloodshot, terrified eyes scanned the crowd before locking directly onto mine. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply stood there, flanked by my loyal family and the unwavering authority of the federal government, watching him realize that the game was officially over. The heavy oak front door swung open smoothly. I stepped out onto the expansive wraparound porch, the wooden floorboards completely silent under my bare feet. I held a steaming ceramic mug of chamomile tea in my right hand, taking a slow, measured sip as I leaned against the sturdy wooden railing. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the front lawn, creating a stark contrast to the absolute chaos unfolding at the security gate. I did not raise my voice. I did not react to her venomous insults. I simply watched Patricia dangle helplessly from the wrought iron bars like a feral animal caught in a snare. Her face contorted with fresh fury as she spotted me standing there completely unbothered by her manic display. She doubled down on her screaming, thrashing against the gate in a desperate attempt to climb over. With my free hand, I pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I opened the camera application, angled the lens perfectly to capture her unhinged behavior, and tapped the red record button. The bright red timer began ticking upward on the screen, documenting every single threat, every curse word, and every frantic kick. "You owe him that money," Patricia howled, her voice hoarse and raw. "I demand you let me in right now." I took another calm sip of my tea, savoring the warmth, and lowered the mug. My voice was steady, projecting clearly across the manicured lawn. "Keep going, Patricia." I called out, my tone entirely devoid of emotion. "The police are already on their way." The faint approaching wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet before she could even process my words. Red and blue lights flashed against the surrounding trees as two local police cruisers turned the corner and sped toward the driveway. They came to an abrupt halt directly behind Patricia's haphazardly parked SUV. The doors swung open, and I immediately recognized the two patrol officers stepping out of the lead vehicle. They were the exact same officers who had stood in my living room just days ago, the ones who had apologetically enforced Derek's forged eviction notice. Their expressions instantly morphed from professional caution to absolute bewilderment as they recognized me standing peacefully on the porch and then looked at the frantic woman currently tangled in the top of the security gate. "Ma'am, step down from the gate immediately," the lead officer ordered, his hand resting firmly on his utility belt. Patricia froze, her eyes darting frantically from the police officers to me. "Officers, you have to arrest her!" Patricia shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is stealing from my son! She is a criminal! The heavy front door opened again, and Jamal stepped out onto the porch to stand beside me. He did not say a word to Patricia. He simply walked down the porch steps, retrieved a sleek black leather wallet from his interior jacket pocket, and flipped it open. The bright gold shield of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network caught the afternoon light. Special Agent Davis, Jamal stated clearly, presenting his federal credentials to the local officers. We have a hostile individual attempting to breach the perimeter of a federal agent's private residence, making documented threats of physical violence and demanding access to funds currently seized in an active federal money laundering investigation. The local officers did not hesitate. They moved in swiftly, pulling a protesting, hysterical Patricia down from the wrought iron gate. The sharp click of metal handcuffs echoed loudly across the driveway. Patricia sobbed uncontrollably, her designer clothes ruined, and her dignity shattered as the officers forcefully guided her into the cramped plastic back seat of the police cruiser. I closed the distance between us, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor of the terminal. Jamal and Hannah walked perfectly in step beside me, forming a unified, impenetrable front. The usual bustling noise of the VIP lounge seemed to fade into a muted hum, leaving only the sharp reality of this final confrontation. Derek was hunched over a pile of expensive, useless designer luggage that Brittany had abandoned in her furious exit. He had his head buried in his hands, his fingers violently gripping his own hair. He looked completely broken, stripped of the custom-tailored suits and arrogant smirks that had defined his entire persona for the last decade. As my shadow fell over him, Derek slowly lifted his head. His eyes were heavily bloodshot, ringed with dark, exhausted circles, and his face was slick with a terrified sweat. For a split second, I saw a flicker of absolute fear in his expression. Then, like clockwork, his narcissistic survival instincts kicked in, and he immediately tried to flip the script. He scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly, and pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "You trapped me!" He hissed, his voice cracking as he tried to project an authority he no longer possessed. "You set me up, Riley. You orchestrated this whole entire thing just to ruin me. You knew exactly what you were doing with that holding company, and you intentionally let me walk right into a federal trap. You are trying to destroy my life because you could not handle the fact that I was leaving you for someone better." He was practically foaming at the mouth, desperately trying to cast himself as the innocent victim of a vindictive wife. He paced frantically in a tight circle around his discarded bags, throwing his hands in the air to appeal to any lingering onlookers. "You froze my money." He continued, his tone shifting into a pathetic whine. "You took everything I had. I was just trying to secure a future, and you sabotaged me. You deliberately locked those accounts knowing I had debts to pay. You set me up to be slaughtered by those people in Dubai." I did not raise my voice. I did not match his frantic, chaotic energy. I simply reached into the heavy leather tote bag hanging from my shoulder and pulled out a thick, meticulously organized manila folder. I held it out, extending my arm until the heavy packet rested right against his chest, forcing him to take it. "No, Derek." I stated, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute calmness that made him flinch. "You trapped yourself." Derek stared at the folder in his hands, his bravado entirely evaporating. He opened the cover with shaking fingers. "Here are the documents proving your catastrophic crypto debts," I explained, watching his eyes widen as he recognized his own encrypted ledger statements printed in high resolution. "Every single illegal margin call, every desperate loan you took from underground syndicates, it is all perfectly documented. I did not force you to gamble our life savings away on volatile offshore markets. You did that entirely on your own." I stepped forward, invading his personal space, forcing him to look away from the papers and directly into my eyes. "Flip to the next page, Derek," I commanded. He fumbled with the thick stack of paper, revealing a highly magnified copy of the power of attorney form he had used to sell our house. "Those are your forged signatures. I did not hold a pen to your hand and force you to commit federal fraud. You chose to bypass the law because you thought you were smarter than everyone else." And turned to the final section. Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as he flipped to the last set of documents. It was a complete trace of the wire transfer initiated from Mia's 529 minor trust account. That is your attempt to steal your own daughter's education fund, I said, my voice hardening into a blade. I did not make you steal from a child. You decided that paying off your violent creditors was more important than your daughter's future. You built this trap, Derek. You gathered the materials, you tied the knots, and you locked the door behind you. I simply refused to be your collateral damage. I just stood back and watched you hand the federal government an airtight, thoroughly documented criminal case on a silver platter. Jamal stepped slightly forward, letting his suit jacket fall open just enough to reveal his badge again. The federal holds on those accounts are permanent, Mr. Wilson, Jamal added with clinical detachment. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division has already flagged you for immediate detention. Derek's knees visibly buckled. The sheer gravity of his situation finally crushed the last remaining fragments of his ego. He dropped the folder, letting the damning evidence scatter across the floor, and actually sank to his knees. He grabbed the edge of my coat, his face contorted in a mask of absolute, unfiltered desperation. "Riley, please," he begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched sob. "Please, I am begging you, have mercy. If I stay here, those creditors will find me. They will kill me, Riley. They do not care about court dates or frozen accounts." He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, completely abandoning any shred of dignity. "I will give you everything," he pleaded frantically. "I will sign away all the marital assets. You can have the house, the cars, the investments, everything. I will grant you full, uncontested custody of Mia. I will never contact either of you again. Just drop the fraud claim. Tell this agent it was a misunderstanding. Please just let me get on that plane to Dubai. If I can just get out of the country, I can disappear. Just let me get on the plane." I looked down at the man I had once promised to spend my life with, feeling nothing but a profound, absolute emptiness. I reached out and gently detached his trembling fingers from my coat. I smoothed the fabric, took a deliberate step back, and offered him a slow, razor-sharp smile. "Oh, you're not getting on any plane." As the words left my mouth, the heavy frosted glass doors of the VIP lounge swung open with commanding force. Two uniformed Transportation Security Administration officers stepped through, immediately flanking the exit to block any potential escape routes. Right behind them marched three plainclothes United States Marshals, their faces set in grim, unyielding lines of absolute authority. Jamal gave a subtle nod to the lead marshal, confirming the target had been secured. I watched the last remaining ounce of color drain from Derek's face. He scrambled backward, his expensive leather loafers slipping against the polished floor until his back hit the glass wall of the lounge. He was completely trapped. The marshals closed the distance in seconds, forming an impenetrable physical barrier around him. The reality of his catastrophic arrogance finally crashed down on him with the weight of a collapsing building. He was not a clever mastermind orchestrating a brilliant international escape. He was a cornered criminal who had just committed textbook federal wire fraud, crossing both state and international lines, all while leaving a massive, glaring digital trail directly to a federal agent's laptop. The lead marshal stepped directly into Derek's personal space, pulled back his jacket to display his silver badge, and began reciting the charges. His voice was clinical and loud enough for the entire lounge to hear. He listed felony wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, forgery of federal military custodial documents, and attempting to flee federal jurisdiction. Derek shook his head violently, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to formulate a single coherent word. He looked at the stern faces of the marshals, then at the frozen banking dashboard on his ruined laptop, and finally at Jamal, who simply stood there, radiating the unstoppable power of the federal government. The realization shattered Derek's mind. There would be no luxury penthouse in Dubai. There would be no fresh start financed by my hard work and our daughter's future. There would only be the cold, sterile reality of a federal holding cell, followed by years in a federal penitentiary. His offshore crypto creditors would have to take a number and wait in line behind the United States Department of Justice. He had gambled his entire existence on outsmarting a military veteran, and he had lost everything in spectacular fashion. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the silent VIP lounge. The marshals roughly pulled Derek's arms behind his back, locking his wrists together with practiced efficiency. They hauled him to his feet, ignoring his pathetic whimpers, and marched him out of the exclusive lounge directly into the massive crowded concourse of the international terminal. Hundreds of travelers stopped dead in their tracks, their conversations halting as they witnessed the spectacle. People pulled out their phones, eagerly recording the disgraced, weeping man being paraded through the airport by federal law enforcement. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. Derek dragged his feet, twisting his neck to look back at me over his shoulder. Tears streamed down his face, ruining his meticulously groomed appearance. He begged me to help him, his voice cracking as he screamed my name across the terminal, promising he would do anything if I just made it stop. He pleaded for mercy desperately, trying to leverage our 10 years of marriage, begging me to remember the man I used to love. I walked out of the lounge and stopped at the edge of the concourse, letting him see my face one final time. I felt absolutely nothing for the pathetic, cowardly stranger crying in front of me. I reached up and calmly adjusted the lapels of my navy uniform jacket, making sure the dark fabric sat perfectly straight against my shoulders. I smoothed down the crisp lines embodying the discipline and honor he had tried so hard to mock and exploit. Without saying a single word, I turned my back to him entirely, letting the marshals drag his hysterical sobbing form away through the sea of staring passengers. As the commotion of Derek's arrest began to fade down the terminal corridor, another entirely satisfying scene unfolded just a few yards away. Brittany had thought she could simply drop her association with a federal fugitive and casually vanish into the airport crowd. She had swiftly retrieved her designer carry-on bag and was attempting to subtly blend into a large tour group heading toward the domestic departure gates. Her head was down, her oversized sunglasses firmly in place, acting as though the spectacular implosion in the VIP lounge had absolutely nothing to do with her. She did not make it very far. A female federal agent stepped smoothly into her path, holding up a commanding hand. Brittany collided directly with the agent, letting out a sharp gasp of indignation. She immediately began an arrogant, highly offensive tirade, demanding the agent move aside and threatening to call her lawyers. The agent remained completely unfazed. She calmly informed Brittany that she was not going anywhere. Brittany was being officially detained for questioning regarding her direct involvement in the receipt of stolen federal funds. The agent pointed explicitly to the luxury jewelry, the designer handbag, and the first-class flight tickets Brittany had attempted to utilize, all purchased with the illicit money Derek had fraudulently acquired from my accounts. The realization hit Brittany like a physical blow. Her arrogant sneer collapsed into genuine terror. She tried to deny knowing anything about the money, stammering that Derek had lied to her and that she was merely an innocent victim in a messy divorce. The agent simply grabbed her by the arm, stating that ignorance was a matter for a federal judge to decide. Jamal tapped my shoulder, gesturing toward the exit, signaling that our work here was finally done. 48 hours after Jamal signaled our departure and we walked out of that airport terminal, the chaotic echo of the international concourse felt like a lifetime away. I sat in the center of my living room, the morning sun streaming through the large bay windows, casting a warm and familiar glow across the hardwood floors. The house was finally mine again, completely scrubbed of Derek's toxic presence. Jamal and Hannah had spent the entire weekend orchestrating a massive logistical operation, hiring a private moving crew to retrieve every single piece of my furniture from the storage facility where Derek had so callously dumped it. They had unpacked boxes, arranged the rugs, and restored the space exactly to how I had always loved it. The silence in the house was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was deeply peaceful. I ran my hand along the soft fabric of my reclaimed sofa, savoring the profound sense of security that came with knowing my sanctuary was entirely impenetrable. I took a slow sip of my coffee, relishing the quiet victory of the morning. Then my cell phone vibrated violently against the glass coffee table, shattering the calm. The caller ID displayed an unknown number routing through a generic out-of-state area code. I picked it up expecting a follow-up call from the federal prosecutor's office regarding the upcoming arraignment hearings. Instead, a sterile, automated female voice filled the speaker. "This is a collect call from a federal detention facility. You have a call from an inmate. Please state your name." A brief static-filled pause followed, and then I heard a ragged, desperate whisper. "Riley, it is Derek. Please pick up." "To accept this call, press 1," the automated voice instructed. I stared at the phone. A part of me wanted to simply decline the charge to sever the connection and let him rot in the agonizing silence of his own making. But my military training demanded total confirmation of the enemy's defeat. I needed to hear the absolute surrender in his voice. I pressed 1. The line clicked, connecting me to the bleak, echoing reality of a federal holding block. The background noise was unmistakable, the harsh clanging of heavy metal doors, the distant shouting of guards, and the echoing murmur of dozens of confined men. "Riley!" Derek gasped, the sound of his breath hitching as if he had been crying for 2 days straight. "Oh my God, Riley, thank you. Thank you for answering. You have no idea what it is like in here. It is a nightmare. They took my shoelaces. They took my belt. I have not slept for a single second. You have to get me out of here." His voice was stripped of all its former polished arrogance, reduced to the pathetic, reedy whine of a coward facing actual consequences for the first time in his pampered life. "I need you to post bail." He continued, speaking in a frantic, rapid-fire rush. "You control the corporate escrow account now. You have the liquidity. You can wire the funds to my public defender. Please, Riley, I am begging you on my hands and knees." When I remained entirely silent, letting him drown in the dead air, his desperation morphed into a sickening attempt at justification. He immediately fell back on his favorite tactic, aggressively playing the victim. "You do not understand the pressure I was under," he cried, his voice echoing off the cinder-block walls of his confinement. "You were always deployed. You were always gone. The pressure of being a man, of being the sole provider, of maintaining our lifestyle in that neighborhood, it was too much. I was just trying to build wealth for us. Those crypto investors, they lied to me. They manipulated the markets. And then they started threatening me, Riley. They said they knew where we lived. They said they were going to hurt me. I forged those documents because I had to save myself from them. I was trying to protect our family. I only wanted to secure our future. You cannot leave me in here for trying to be a good husband." The sheer audacity of his delusion was staggering. He was sitting in a federal penitentiary for attempting to steal his own daughter's college fund, and he was still trying to twist the narrative to cast himself as a martyred protector. He had not learned a single thing. He was entirely incapable of experiencing genuine remorse, only regret that he had been caught. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, feeling the absolute clarity of my own strength. "The only pressure you had was your own greed," I stated, my voice slicing through his hysterical sobbing, like a perfectly sharpened blade. The line went dead quiet on his end as my words hit him. "You did not forge those documents to protect anyone but yourself. You did not drain me as trust fund to save this family. You did it to finance your pathetic, arrogant fantasy with a woman who abandoned you the second your credit cards declined. You want to talk to me about pressure, Derek? I survived 10 years of combat deployments. I survived rocket attacks, ambushes, and the daily crushing weight of keeping my unit alive in hostile territory. You could not even survive your own ego." He tried to interrupt, stammering my name in a breathless panic, but I refused to let him speak. "You built a house of cards, and you lit the match." I continued, my tone dropping to a clinical, icy detachment. "The federal government has your forged paperwork. The IRS has your offshore ledgers. You are going to prison for a very long time, and you will not see a single dime of my money to bail you out. Do not ever call this number again." Without waiting for his response, I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. The call disconnected instantly. I placed the phone back down on the glass table, leaned back against the cushions of my sofa, and took another sip of my coffee. the house was perfectly quiet once again. The profound silence of my living room lasted exactly 24 hours. The following afternoon, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel echoed through the front windows. I did not need to check the security cameras to know who had breached the perimeter of my peace. I walked to the front door, pulling it open, just as Patricia trudged up the porch steps. The transformation was staggering. The arrogant, impeccably groomed socialite who had practically tried to scale my security gate days earlier was completely gone. In her place stood a fragile, hollowed-out shell of a woman. She wore the exact same clothes she had been arrested in, now severely wrinkled and stained. Her designer makeup was smeared into dark, exhausted shadows under her eyes. She had clearly just been released on bail, and the reality of a county holding cell had stripped away every ounce of her manufactured superiority. She did not scream my name this time. She did not demand anything. She simply stood on my welcome mat, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Riley," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of utter defeat. "Please, I am begging you to help me." I crossed my arms, my posture rigid and unyielding. "You are violating the conditions of your bail just by standing on my property, Patricia. You have exactly 1 minute to give me a reason not to call the police back here." She gasped for air, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. "They came to my house." She choked out, her entire body trembling violently. "These men, they showed up at my front door at dawn. Derek lied to me. He did not just drain Mia's college fund. When those crypto investors started threatening him, he needed collateral to buy time before he tried to run. He forged my signature on a deed transfer. He put my entire estate up as collateral for his underground debts. The men told me I have 48 hours to vacate the premises, or they will force me out. Riley, they are taking my home. They are taking everything I have ever worked for. You have to use the escrow money to pay them off. You have to save me." I stared at the broken woman standing on my porch, feeling an absolute icy detachment settle over my mind. For 10 years, I had bent over backward, trying to earn a single shred of respect from this woman. I had smiled politely through her thinly veiled insults. I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Now the architect of my misery was begging for financial salvation. "I am not giving you a single penny," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. Patricia let out a strangled cry, reaching a trembling hand toward me. "Riley, please, I will be on the street. You cannot do this to me. We are family." "We have never been family," I shot back, my words striking her like physical blows. "You spent a decade calling me a failure because I wore combat boots instead of designer heels. You mocked my military service at every holiday dinner. You told anyone who would listen that I was an unfit mother simply because I had a demanding career. You actively encouraged your son's toxic behavior, inflating his fragile ego while tearing down my accomplishments at every given opportunity. And when Derek forged legal documents and sold the very roof over my head, you did not show an ounce of concern for me or your granddaughter. You cheered when your son sold my home. You celebrated my devastation because you thought it meant you had finally won." I took a step forward, forcing her to look directly into my eyes. "You enabled a monster, Patricia. You spent his entire life shielding him from the consequences of his actions. Well, the shield is gone. His debts are your problem now." The reality of my words slammed into Patricia with crushing, undeniable force. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the hard wooden planks of the porch, her knees hitting the ground with a dull, heavy thud. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, bowing forward until her forehead nearly touched the floorboards. The pristine, untouchable matriarch was reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating mess on my welcome mat. "I have nothing," she wailed, her voice echoing across the quiet suburban lawn. "I gave him everything I had. I paid for his lawyers. I paid his bail. I have absolutely no money left. I am going to lose my house. I am going to lose my entire life." She was sobbing so hard she could barely draw breath, choked by the terrifying realization that her blind devotion to her golden child had authored her total financial ruin. Derek had not just destroyed his own life, he had systematically dismantled hers to buy himself a few extra hours of freedom. She had fed his narcissism for 35 years, and he had ultimately devoured her to survive. I looked down at her shaking form completely devoid of pity. There was no joy in witnessing her destruction, only the profound clinical satisfaction of seeing the universe violently correct a long-standing imbalance. I had survived a decade of her psychological warfare, and I had emerged entirely unbroken. Actions have consequences, I said quietly, my voice barely carrying over the sound of her relentless sobbing. I took a deliberate step backward into my foyer. Without a second glance, I grasped the heavy brass handle of the oak door and pulled it shut, the heavy deadbolt clicking into place with a sharp, echoing finality. 2 weeks later, the heavy oak door of my house was replaced by the sleek floor-to-ceiling glass walls of Diane Hopkins' corner office in downtown Boston. I sat in a pristine white leather chair, my posture relaxed, a stark contrast to the terrified woman I had been just a month prior. The massive mahogany conference table between us was covered in neatly organized stacks of legal documents, bank statements, and court filings. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background, providing a clinical, efficient soundtrack to the absolute dismantling of my marriage. Diane sat across from me, her silver hair perfectly styled, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed the final decree. Beside her sat a thick, securely bound dossier, stamped with the seal of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Jamal had delivered on his promise. His team of federal forensic accountants had completely gutted Derek's financial history, exposing every hidden account, every fraudulent wire transfer, and every desperate illegal loan he had taken. They had mapped out his entire criminal ecosystem with terrifying precision. "I have been practicing family law for 30 years, Riley," Diane stated, looking up from the paperwork with a genuine smile of professional satisfaction. "And I have never seen a divorce proceeding move with this kind of lethal velocity." The family court judge took one look at the federal indictment, reviewed the forensic accounting report outlining his extensive wire fraud, and immediately approved our emergency motions. She slid a thick stack of paper across the polished wood, pointing to a signature line at the very bottom. "Because your husband actively committed federal fraud to hide marital assets, and because he forged legal documents to unlawfully sell your primary residence, he has forfeited absolutely every right he possessed in this marriage," Diane explained, her voice ringing with absolute authority. The judge was entirely merciless. "You are being awarded 100% of the marital estate. You retain sole and absolute physical and legal custody of Mia. Derek is stripped of all visitation rights permanently. Furthermore, the court has ordered full financial restitution. Any lingering debts, penalties, or liabilities he attempted to attach to your name or your joint accounts have been completely severed and reassigned solely to him." I picked up the heavy gold pen Diane offered. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single pang of regret or sorrow. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with fluid, decisive strokes, legally erasing Derek Wilson from my life forever. Diane collected the signed decree, slipping it into a pristine manila folder. "Now on to the most important matter," she said, tapping a few keys on her sleek laptop. She turned the screen toward me. It was a live view of a highly secured, newly established banking portal. My eyes immediately locked onto the bold green numbers displayed at the top of the dashboard. $150,000. The federal holds on the seized accounts were officially lifted at 9 o'clock this morning. Diane confirmed, her tone softening into genuine warmth. Agent Davis fast-tracked the release of the stolen funds. The entire amount has been safely recovered and rerouted entirely out of Derek's reach. I stared at the numbers, feeling a profound, overwhelming wave of relief wash over my entire body. The tight, suffocating knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for weeks finally dissolved. "As we discussed," Diane continued, pointing to the specific account designation on the screen, "I have placed these funds into a strict, irrevocable educational trust for Mia. You are the sole managing trustee. Derek cannot access it. His creditors cannot touch it. The federal government cannot seize it. The money is locked in a vault of titanium legal protections. It can only be utilized for her education and future development. Her future is completely, undeniably secure." I reached out and lightly touched the edge of the laptop screen. I had fought a brutal, exhausting war against a man I once trusted with my life. I had navigated lies, betrayals, and federal investigations. But looking at that restored balance, I knew every single sleepless night had been entirely worth it. I had protected my daughter. I had won. Diane closed the laptop, but she did not stand up to end the meeting. Instead, she reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out one final, exceptionally thick folder. She placed it squarely in the center of the table, her sharp eyes meeting mine with a look of predatory satisfaction. "There is one final piece of business you should be aware of just for your own peace of mind," Diane said, interlacing her fingers and leaning forward. "As you know, the federal government is currently processing Derek for multiple felony counts. He is looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary." She tapped the heavy folder. "However, the crypto syndicate he borrowed from in Dubai is not satisfied with simply taking his mother's house. They want their initial investment back, plus the astronomical offshore interest he agreed to. They have retained aggressive stateside counsel and just filed massive civil suits against Derek personally." I raised an eyebrow, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face as I grasped the implication. "What exactly does that mean for him?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "It means absolute permanent ruin," Diane stated clearly, matching my smile. "The federal government will take his freedom, but these civil judgments will take whatever is left of his future. The courts will award the syndicate an insurmountable financial judgment. If Derek ever manages to serve his time and walk out of that federal prison, he will be instantly crushed by civil liabilities. The judgments will allow them to permanently garnish his wages for the rest of his natural life. He will never be able to own a home, hold a standard bank account, or build a single ounce of wealth ever again. He is financially paralyzed until the day he dies." I stood up from the white leather chair, smoothing the fabric of my tailored suit. I looked out the massive glass windows at the sprawling Boston skyline, feeling the warm sunlight hit my face. The war was officially over. Derek had tried to bury me, but he had only succeeded in digging his own inescapable grave. The crisp autumn air biting at the window panes outside was a stark contrast to the overwhelming warmth radiating from my kitchen. It was Thanksgiving Day, and for the first time in over a decade, my home actually felt like a sanctuary. The rich, savory aroma of roasted turkey and sage stuffing mingled with the sweet scent of a freshly baked pecan pie filling every corner of the house. I stood at the kitchen island, expertly carving the bird, listening to the beautiful, chaotic symphony of genuine happiness echoing from the living room. Jamal and Hannah had arrived 2 hours earlier, with their twin boys instantly transforming the formerly quiet house into a vibrant hub of life. The twins were currently engaged in a highly competitive video game match with Mia on the living room rug, their loud cheers and groans of defeat serving as the perfect holiday soundtrack. Hannah was leaning against the counter next to me, casually sipping a glass of robust red wine, while expertly stealing small pieces of crispy turkey skin when she thought I was not looking. Jamal was tasked with managing the mashed potatoes, taking the job with the same intense tactical focus he usually reserved for federal investigations. There was no walking on eggshells. There were no snide passive-aggressive comments about the state of the baseboards or the brand of the wine, the kind of psychological warfare Patricia used to wage at every holiday gathering. There was no Derek hovering near the front door, constantly checking his cryptocurrency portfolios and complaining about how my cooking did not meet his mother's impossible standards. The toxic, suffocating cloud that had choked this family for years was completely eradicated. We had replaced it with unfiltered, authentic joy. I looked at the people gathered in my home, my chosen family, the ones who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me in the trenches when my entire world had seemingly collapsed. They had not run from the wreckage. They had helped me rebuild it brick by brick. I set the carving knife down and wiped my hands on a dish towel, taking a moment to simply breathe in the peace of the afternoon. Before I could turn to check the oven, a pair of arms wrapped tightly around my waist from behind. I looked down, a soft smile automatically forming on my face as Mia buried her face against my back. I turned around and pulled her into a proper embrace, holding my daughter close. She felt lighter somehow. The heavy, anxious shadow that had haunted her eyes during the agonizing weeks of Derek's deception had completely vanished. She was back to being a vibrant, thriving teenager, secure in the knowledge that her home and her future were entirely safe. She pulled back slightly, looking up at me with an expression of fierce, unwavering pride that mirrored the women I had served alongside in the military. "I knew we'd win, Mom," Mia said, her voice carrying a quiet but absolute certainty. I reached up and gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I leaned down and pressed a long, meaningful kiss to her forehead, letting the reality of her safety wash over me all over again. "We didn't just win, baby," I replied, my voice steady and resolute, matching her unwavering gaze. "We cleared the battlefield." She grinned a bright, genuine smile that lit up the entire kitchen before turning to grab a dinner roll from the cooling rack and jogging back to the living room to rejoin the twins' chaotic game. I watched her go, a profound sense of maternal victory swelling in my chest. "Food is ready," I announced, carrying the large platter of carved turkey toward the dining room table. Jamal carried the massive bowl of potatoes, while Hannah trailed behind with the vegetables and gravy. We began organizing the feast, the casual banter flowing easily between us. In the adjacent living room, the television was playing quietly in the background, tuned to a local news station that had been airing muted parade coverage all morning. Suddenly, the bright, cheerful parade music cut out, replaced by the sharp, serious tone of a breaking news bumper. The sudden shift in audio caught Jamal's attention. He paused the serving spoon hovering over a bowl and turned his head toward the screen. "Turn that up for a second, Mia," Jamal called out, his voice dropping an octave into his professional register. Mia grabbed the remote and increased the volume. The local anchor appeared on the screen, his expression somber as a familiar high-resolution mugshot appeared in the graphic box floating above his right shoulder. It was Derek. He looked hollowed out, his arrogant smirk replaced by the terrified stare of a completely broken man. "Breaking news this hour out of the federal courthouse," the anchor stated clearly. Local real estate developer and crypto broker Derek Wilson has just been sentenced to 10 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Wilson pleaded guilty to multiple counts of aggravated wire fraud and the forgery of federal military loan documents, attempting to unlawfully sell a property funded by a Veterans Affairs loan. The anchor continued detailing the massive civil judgments that would await Wilson upon his eventual release, confirming that his victims had successfully secured lifelong wage garnishments against his future earnings. Jamal reached for his wine glass, lifting it high in the air. A slow, deeply satisfied smile spread across his face as he looked directly at me. "To justice," Jamal said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. I picked up my own glass, the crystal catching the warm autumn light, and clinked it gently against his. "To justice." I took a sip of the rich red wine and slipped away from the bustling kitchen, sliding the heavy glass door open and stepping out onto the back porch. The crisp, biting chill of the late November air hit my face, a sharp and welcome contrast to the stifling heat of the oven and the crowded living room. I leaned my forearms against the wooden railing, looking out over the perfectly manicured lawns of my quiet suburban neighborhood. Streetlights were just beginning to flicker to life, casting long golden shadows across the pavement. It was so incredibly peaceful. For a decade, this exact peace had been a heavily guarded illusion. I took another sip of wine, letting the memories wash over me, finally stripped of their former sting. I remembered the exact smirk on Derek's face when he used to wave away my military service, calling my deployments to active combat zones a dramatic camping trip, while he spent my hazard pay on designer watches. I remembered Patricia sitting at my dining table, criticizing the way I kept my own house, actively undermining my authority as a mother, while I was thousands of miles away, sleeping on a canvas cot. They had looked at my combat boots and seen a lack of sophistication. They had looked at my quiet demeanor and assumed I was weak, malleable, and easily manipulated. They never understood that military service fundamentally rewrites your psychological baseline. While they were busy hosting lavish neighborhood parties and mocking my so-called lack of ambition, I was running tactical risk assessments on my own marriage. Every time Derek deflected a question about our finances, I quietly secured another document. Every time Patricia made a thinly veiled threat about Mia's upbringing, I shifted more assets into impenetrable legal trusts. I did not scream, I did not throw tantrums, and I did not beg for their respect. I simply treated their toxic entitlement as a hostile insurgency. I mapped their movements, identified their vulnerabilities, and quietly fortified my own perimeter. I let them believe they were the architects of my ruin, completely blind to the fact that I was handing them the shovels to dig their own graves. I turned my head slightly, catching a glimpse of the scene unfolding inside my home through the sliding glass door. Jamal was now demonstrating an elaborate, completely fabricated dance move to the twins, sending Mia and Hannah into fits of hysterical laughter. Seeing them, a profound realization settled deep into my bones. For years, I thought my greatest defense was the corporate LLC, the encrypted offshore accounts, and the hidden emergency funds. I thought power was about holding the biggest financial hammer and keeping it completely hidden from view. But true enduring power has absolutely nothing to do with ruthlessness or bank balances. True power is born entirely from preparation and an unshakable knowledge of your own worth. Derek had possessed every societal advantage: the wealthy family, the country club pedigree, the polished corporate facade, but he had zero discipline. He cracked the second the universe demanded accountability. My actual secret weapon was the clinical, unwavering discipline forged in the military, the ability to endure agonizing pressure without breaking rank. And more importantly, my power came from the people currently standing in my kitchen. Blood had given me nothing but a deceitful husband and a monstrous mother-in-law. My chosen family had given me absolute salvation. Jamal had risked his own federal career to protect my daughter's future, utilizing his forensic expertise to expose a massive criminal enterprise. Hannah had held my hand through the darkest, most terrifying nights of the divorce, providing the emotional armor I needed to keep fighting. They were my loyal infantry, the people who ran toward the fire when everyone else fled. They did not demand I shrink myself to fit their egos. They simply handed me the ammunition and stood by my side. I set my empty wine glass down on the wrought iron patio table. Resting right beside it, glinting in the fading autumn twilight, was my heavy brass Navy challenge coin. I reached out and picked it up, feeling the familiar comforting weight of the cold metal against my palm. I ran my thumb over the raised emblem, the eagle and anchor, serving as a permanent tactile reminder of everything I had survived. Derek was spending his Thanksgiving in a federal holding cell, eating a processed meal from a plastic tray, staring at the concrete walls of a cage he had built with his own two hands. Patricia was currently packing her belongings into cardboard boxes, forced to vacate her pristine estate before the Dubai Syndicate's collectors forcibly removed her from the premises. They had both believed they were untouchable. They had both believed my silence was a symptom of surrender. I gripped the challenge coin tightly, listening to my daughter's joyous, unburdened laughter ring out through the glass doors. I had secured her college fund, preserved her home, and completely excised the cancer from her life. The storm had finally passed, leaving nothing but clean air and unbroken ground in its wake. When you dedicate 10 years of your life to defending a nation, you learn how to spot a threat. And when a coward tries to steal your daughter's future, you do not just fight back. You ensure they never step foot on your battlefield again.